training as we go. So I decided to try and put something together about back to nature and how we are going to look at incorporating natural history of our bears. Elsa Poulsen always taught us about behavior-based husbandry and knowing what makes your bears special and what makes your bears unique, and how are we going to incorporate this into training. Angela did mention we've got 2 parts we're going to kind of go through. I broke this presentation down into 2 sort of sections so that we can we can do some questions partway through, and then also some more at the end if anybody has any. So without further ado, I wanted to be able to touch on some of the fun stuff. Let's see if this is going to move forward. There we go. I have been lucky enough over my career, I've been doing this a very long time now, to be able to care for, at some point or another, all 8 extant species of bears. Some of them more, some of them less than others. I did spend 5 years with pandas. I've done a lot with the North American species, not quite so much, say, with Andeans, but I have fairly extensive species with all of them. And I can tell you what Elsa told all of us, having done so, that a bear is not just a bear. And it's funny, when I talk welfare, training, enrichment to any group of people, to any demographics or audience, that's actually how I work at getting through to them the importance of understanding the natural and individual history of our animals. Is people may think, you know, oh, I want to go see the bears at the zoo, or, oh, I saw a bear in the wild. But a bear is not just a bear. There's so much variation in the different species, both in their physiology. It might be something so simple as that tiny radial sesamoid bone in the giant panda wrist that lets them rotate and grasp things, up to the muscular conformation and bone shape of a polar bear skull that makes it so distinct and different. This shapes their physiology, and this, of course, leads to behaviors. We do end up with predisposed genetic behaviors from animals evolving over time, from them adapting to environments and changes. And so we'll see significant differences between the bears based on behaviors as well. All bears should obviously be treated safely. Generally, we always want to make sure we're interacting through protected contact and managing them appropriately. But we're also going to end up with different types of safety considerations, potentially depending on the bear species that we may be actually working with. So all of these are going to shape our training programs and our training goals, but really thinking about the natural history of those whatever species we are working with and how we're going to incorporate that in. Because their physiology is really critical. You're going to get some bears that it is absolutely natural for them to interact with everything, with their paws, with their mouth, with their tongue. They're going to be moving all the time. They're going to be climbing. It's going to be a natural inclination to grab things, to maybe pull things in. Whereas other species are going to be much more grounded. They're going to be much more terrestrial. They'll look at smashing things, chasing things, particularly your brown bears, your grizzlies, your polar bears. So they're going to have a different approach to how they manage things. Might be a little more, react a little more slowly than some of the little quicker, more arboreal species, but their physiology and how they respond is going to play into not only how you work with them from a safety perspective and how you set yourself up for success, but how they're going to respond to you, and then how you're going to set up your environment. And we'll get some examples of that. Because again, while they may all be about the same internally for the most part, you're not going to have to worry about different veins in that. It may be how they move that helps shape then some of your goals. Because for an example, and again, we'll get there, a sun bear is very likely you're going to use a different paw if you're trying to train blood draw training than from a polar bear, in a different position where they're going to be comfortable and may stay in place for an extended period of time. So again, you've got that core anatomy and that core base for all of the bears, but their individual species physiology and possibly individual history, if they have arthritis or other issues, are going to be different and need to factor into setting your goals. So skeletal system, musculoskeletal system, organs are generally going to be the same. I really like the circulatory system picture on the right because this is a great example of different ways and targets you could look at for trying to get at voluntary blood collection. Separately, we do have as a resource, we did publish a paper. I had actually written and authored it several years ago through the AAZK forum, and we brought it up and presented at Bear Care before on voluntary blood draws in bear species. So that's accessible to everybody. If you have interest in that and you can't find it on the website, you can reach out to us. But then, of course, your nervous system, which may give you some insight into behaviors that you're seeing, how you're looking at it, where you may want to do injections, darting, those types of things. Or if you're looking to palpate, you're looking for x-rays, you're looking to try and identify some issues, these kind of basics will give you that initial idea of, okay, what do I want from the animals? How is it going to be easiest for them to interact with me? And remembering that bears are going to perceive the world very differently than we are. I know that sounds like, you know, something just inane to say, and it's like a no-brainer, but we have to take into account that they've got extraordinary hearing. They've got an extraordinary sense of smell. So they may be picking up on things that we are unaware of. If you are working on a string or in an area that, let's say you've got hoof stock, you've been preparing food in another area, and then you came to work with your bears, their attention may not be as focused as you would want it to be on you because they're busy smelling all these other odors that you brought along with you from another area. Their sight and their vision is less likely to be as good as ours. So we need to be thinking about lighting conditions. Having trained bears in holding, depending on if the light is behind you, if it's in front of you, depending on how tight or dense your mesh or your bars might be, your protective barrier, the bears might have more problems seeing through that. And this also should shape your cues. You want your cues for bears, if you're using visual cues, to be very broad, to be very different, to be very obvious and clear. So if they're having problems seeing things that's not necessarily their best sense to react to, you're making things as clear and concise as possible. And then keeping in mind that bears can definitely sense vibrations. They're going to be sensitive to, you know, changes in everything from, you know, air pressure to temperature of the floor, the area around it. So these things that they might be perceiving that could be impacting your training, a training session, or just their behavior in general, it's really important to try to think about these things and factor them in to set them up for success with your antecedents, your environment, and how you're prepping them to interact with you. I talked a little bit about this, like this is a great example of thinking about your bear's natural physiology, use their abilities and their behaviors to reach your goals. This was actually in one of my previous facilities we worked with the pandas, where we wanted to be able to do voluntary blood draws to be able to monitor hormones for potential like breeding and pregnancy. And so this was actually modeled off of a gorilla or an orangutan sleeve to get at those veins that are in the inside of that leg. And that little bar was for safety, and knowing that pandas will grasp things. What we had actually done was we had it so they could sit, be comfortable on their butts, reach through. We could adjust the height of that depending whether it was the male, the female size. You can see where the length of that bar is adjustable so that the animal can safely grasp on. And then while they've grasped on, which is a natural behavior for them, we actually know that we're likely safe to go in and start doing some work because that's one of the safety parameters we maintain. So using that really helps set us up for success. Here's a different example of obtaining the same type of behavior and expectations in a different species of bear. This was done at the two different zoos here you can see, and where the bears would reach around, this was more comfortable for them. They're less likely to turn their leg up and grasp under like a panda, but they can still actually get to that same set of veins while the animal is still holding on and maintaining a safety position so that we know keepers and veterinary staff interacting are safe. This is completely different from how we might do this for a polar bear. And this has obviously been successfully done in Toronto, and I know a few other zoos with this foot port where the bear is lying down, comfortable, facing you. It can maintain that position for a while, and then it puts that paw forward. Now we're going for different veins. You're going for veins that are on the top of the foot, but you can see that this animal is going to be more comfortable. You're thinking about a polar bear. You're thinking about how this is going to work for them long term. So we're using the animal's natural abilities, natural physiology, and what's going to be comfortable for them to help us reach and succeed with our training goals. And this is a great little video of the same sort of thing, but with, with a brown bear. You can see here what they're going to do. He's obviously shifted in and participated into an enclosure or a shifting crate. But here, they're going to go for his back so they can keep his front paws maintained and busy. And it's natural for him to comfortably lie on his side and then They can ask them to put that leg through. They've got a raised up spot. So now they can get at that same set. In this case, it's going to be the tarsals instead of the carpals, the front leg, but you're still going to go for this. This is the same foot you might go for with a sun bear, but they're likely to be sitting up on a little perch and popping that back foot through like a little doorway. So again, trying to reach the same goal, but thinking about those natural behaviors, abilities of your animals to set yourself up to succeed. Now, here's an example. This is a series of photos that I had taken when we were doing some panda training with a colleague of mine, and how you might like get to something, just series of steps, which we know is shaping, to say get something like that back foot in a rollover. So we would start with targeting your pretty basic behavior. It's really easy to get high compliance on that, and then start shaping that into a down behavior. So now you've got the animal lying down on cue. And then as the animal will kind of follow, bears generally, but pandas in particular, tend to be kind of lazy, and you can use that to your advantage. So if you have them move and you just move the target over, they're unlikely to get up and move and completely reposition. They're probably just going to be lazy and try and roll over to keep meeting that target, in which case you can now capture that behavior in that rollover. And then when they do, guess what? Most of the time, they're going to pop that little leg up in the air. Whereas if you had two sides to your training panel, or you had another person that was on that side, let's say there was a protective barrier where our door is there, you could then access that back foot. This is the type of training that they took advantage of, obviously, with that brown bear. So it's just sequences. It's using what you know your bears to be able to do, to be physically comfortable for them, so that you can actually get at your goals while still thinking about all of those and succeeding. If an animal is uncomfortable, they will likely still comply. You're not going to get the duration that you want. You're going to get fidgeting. You're going to get to the point where they're going to give up, because you are going to have and need to ensure that your reinforcement and that value of participating overrides discomfort, possibly pain if there's any type of arthritis or issues or whatever going on. So the more you can do to make the animal comfortable based on their natural species physiology, their natural history, and their age and some individual concerns, they're going to set you up for success for frequency of participation, duration, and just that overall willingness to participate. So as you're choosing behaviors, and you're thinking, what do I train? Or, oh, somebody wants to get at this, how can I go? You really want to, again, all these factors we've been talking about, how do they contribute to your needs and your goals? It is a priority for us to get this animal injection trained because he needs to have dental work done within the next 3 months. So you could prioritize voluntary injection training for anesthesia, and then think about, okay, so now how am I going to go about that? Are your facilities, your environment set up for success, your antecedents? There are always people that can help come up with ideas where they've done something like that squeeze cage where the animal shifts in and then you can move it. We had something very similar for our pandas. Brown bears, I've seen that done. Or do you have to get something constructed in-house or out of house, like a port for a foot? Always thinking of safety. Pandas, in the example, they grasped that little bar. We knew as long as they were holding on, they can't hold on to the bar and then make a grab for us or the equipment. They're incompatible behaviors. Same kind of thing, thinking about those safety considerations. Medical considerations, age, illness, injury, anything that might make them less willing to participate, less responsive to food, and then scheduling exhibit times. Like, these are all things we all know we have to take into account. If all bears have to be on exhibit by 9 a.m., then do you do your training at 8:30 while you're shifting them out? Do you do it at lunch when you bring them in and reset the yard for enrichment? Do you set up a place where you can do this training on exhibit, turn it into a VIP or a training demonstration for guests or visitors as well, and then factor it into your day that way? You can use these very well as education talks. People love to learn about this. Not only then does it showcase the science and the commitment in our industry for caring for these animals, but it showcases the amount of work that most people don't realize go on behind the scenes when caring for exotic species. And then research. We can use this information for research. If you're collecting blood, you're doing voluntary blood collection for something, see if someone nearby at the university, or you want to be able to bank plasma for in case you needed, if you were in a breeding program and having cubs? Do you want to bank or test for other things that might be part of studies that are out? Do you want to be able to contribute or look at and monitor blood levels from a year-to-year basis? So you could be looking at baseline kidney values. So think about that and other things that you might be able to do research-wise while you're gathering information as part of your training goals. We had a great series of posts a few weeks ago about how do I train eyes and eye behavior in a bear. There are several different ways we could talk about doing it. This was actually when I was in China. I target trained this bear to touch his nose to my fist, and then I moved the fist very slowly sideways and generalized it into a cue for eye, which was the finger pointing. And you can see this is early on in the stages, but he would then turn his head to the side following my hand and then lean that his face up. So I can now get a better look at his eye. I could start desensitizing to light, possibly touch, possibly drops. And this could just be good for ocular examinations. This is great for pandas. They're always messing with bamboo and they end up with corneal lesions and ulcers. A lot of arboreal bears that push through foliage, you'll find, can have this kind of issue. So it's always a good idea to be able to get a look at their eyes and be able to administer drops or potentially treatment. I can't stress enough the importance of target training. It shapes and leads into so many other behaviors and is a high compliance, immediate response behavior. So if you have frustration or regression in your training, you need to build up some behavioral momentum to get them excited again. Target is always an easy way to do it. Presentation of paw and foot. You can see the pads, you can see the claws, you can see how they're doing. As they're presenting it, you can assess mobility. How are they doing for stiffness or the like? And here you can see, this is something I alluded to. This is a little sun bear foot that got popped out this port. So now we can start desensitizing to touch, not only to check pads, check claws, but we can also start desensitizing so we could do potential blood draws from the rear foot. This is a great place on sun bears to do it while they sit comfortably on a little seat and hold on to the mesh safely and pop their little bottom feet out. Some other opportunities, open mouth. Obviously, we know why that would be critical and important, to be able to get really good visuals of the palate, the teeth, how they're doing. Stationing is another great one. Teaching them to go, it's like targeting, but going to a location. You can use this for remote behaviors. You can use this to teach incompatible or calmness if you are looking at, you have more than one animal in your holding area or habitat. You can reinforce somebody for sitting calmly at their station while you provide interactions to the other one, remembering you continue to reinforce for calm behavior at a station. It gives them something simple to do that's incompatible with messing with you or another animal. Injection training, think about vaccinations, think about possibly giving fluids in certain cases, hormone injections if you're part of a breeding program and you want to be able to bump a cycle. And I have successfully trained several species of bears for voluntary injections for anesthesia. And I can tell you, it reduces the stress to almost nothing. It increases the effectiveness, we'll just go with that, of your drugs because the animal is calm. They're not in a heightened state. There's not adrenaline burning. You have control where that drug goes in so it doesn't end up in a fat store to come out later or at a different unexpected time. And it reduces the time because their activity levels are low. Their their whole excitement levels are so dropped because they trust you and that once you've got them desensitized to this, I have seen a full-grown lion out in under 5 minutes from a single dose because they're just calm, they're relaxed, and then you can also generally get them in a place that you want them to. I cannot understate or overstate the value of this particular type of training. Like anything else, get at them when you can. Eyes, ears, paws, mouth. You want to be able to check everything when you can. And then start looking at more complex ways. This actually is a video from several years ago when I had hair, and of us training, and this was a panda because you can collect urine, but vaginal cytology is a more effective way of precisely monitoring which stage, because if you know pandas, you have like a 24-hour window where they're going to be receptive to introductions to breeding. And if you're going to do those introductions or perform artificial insemination, you've got to have a pretty good idea of when that window is. And so I promise you, this is more safe than it looks. Lun is taught her paws hold on there. If those paws move, I move and pull out. She was taught to pop her tail down because that works like a little trap door she could slam shut if she wanted. Had to keep her back feet. You can see she would kind of move in naturally to protect herself. I've got a really funny story if we've got time later at one of the things you learn, things you pick up when other people observe your training sessions. But then she would hold position. I could quickly roll that out, and she would get huge rewards, not only while I was doing the training, but then at the end once she was released. So this is the end of a very long process of training for position, for safety, for her holding, but you can see how effective that is. And now with this slide, we have a very effective means of measuring immediately under a microscope what stage that she may be in by vaginal cytology. Blood draws, we talked about this, top of the feet, the arms, getting them to voluntarily participate. This is our boy Yang. His butt is sitting there. This is at the right height. You can see we can move these panels. It's the right height for him to be comfortable and just lean on in there like this is no big deal. And they will hang out for a significant period of time and allow you to do this once they trust, the process. Something interesting, pandas love to see what was going on. If they could watch what you were doing and they could see what you were doing, they really didn't seem to care overly much. So that might be something to think about and factor in. If they're curious and if they want to watch, that might be something to incorporate. I discussed palpation. There's different ways. We always want to, whether it's aging, whether it's pregnancy, whether it's illness, whether there's a mass, arthritis, we want to be able to get some voluntary x-rays, ultrasounds, different testing done. It might be echocardiograms, and being able to have them positioned. This is a little foot port. You change and move the seat around. This is exactly the same place. We would drop a slot in on this bottom picture for blood draws. Now we've repurposed this location, and we have done, now we're doing voluntary ultrasounds. You can see the difference. Safety-wise, she has to hook her paw there on the bars, and I maintain that. And I would also be watching very closely as we advanced with this training. One hand would be on the top of that paw. So if I could feel any movement, I would pull out the veterinarian and the $50,000 probe immediately just to make sure they were safe. Because as you can see, when you're doing ultrasound, they're watching the screen, they're focused on what they're doing. So we're their eyes, we're their safety, and they're relying on us to ensure that we are doing everything we can to make sure that that's the safest, best experience possible. So those are just some examples. You can train almost anything, but those are ones I've been successful at. I thought might be some great examples where I've really thought about incorporating physiology, natural history into being successful. And as you're looking at those goals and reaching them, some of the other considerations besides just natural history, physiology, morphology, you want to really think about, we touched on it a bit, but is age. You can start training cubs at a very, very young age, but you're going to have different sizing. You're going to have different safety measures. They can squeeze through all kinds of things. Mom has to be occupied and comfortable with you interacting with the cub. So you need to think about that. As adults, obviously, that's what we kind of plan all of our training programs around. So our safety equipment, our devices, they're all sized for generally adult bears. And then as they get older, when they're geriatric, because under human care, we know with good veterinary care, good nutrition, that we've extended these animals' lives beyond what they would normally experience in their natural habitat. So we deal with old bear problems. We deal with arthritis. We deal with cancer. We deal with eye issues. We deal with dental infections. All of these things where, okay, we want to be able to help them. So having your older animals participate is absolutely critical. And then thinking about, how do I adjust things? Do we need to put ramps in to make it more comfortable? Do we put a panel in a place where the animal has to take less steps to get there? How can we now accommodate our training to meet the animal's needs and make them comfortable while we're doing it? Annual metabolic and hormonal stages. Not every bear is going to go into a torpor or a hibernation-ish phase, but they are going to experience some measure of whether it's a hyperphagia, changes in their activity levels based on seasonal changes. It might be hormonal due to pregnancies or seasonality of hormones in like pandas. And they may do this, they may sleep. They may just want to lie there. They really may want to minimally move. So if it's critical you need to train, don't try and train bears during a torpor or a hibernation phase. Don't wake them up, let them be. But for example, in pandas, when Lun Lun would start declining in activity because her hormones were increasing, we could still get her to participate, but it took a lot of rewards, and we really had to work at shortening up the distance because she just wasn't going to be interested in participating to that level. As well, when the male hit that hormonal stage, he would spend more time wandering and patrolling the edges of his territory, and he was less interested in food and participating with us. As well, in a hyperphagia phase, if your animals are excessively hungry, it's more dangerous. They're going to be more frantic. Their attention is going to be less focused on duration and that they're going to be driven to move, to forage. So you're either going to be stuffing tons of food in there to keep them calm, or you're really going to have to shorten your expectations for what they're going to do duration-wise. Existing or recognized health concerns, you may have obesity issues, you may have things that are going to impair their normal movement, their normal respiration, their normal ability to participate. We talked about some like arthritis and that. And as they get older, as you have a geriatric bear, they're definitely going to have not just age-related movement concerns, they may have other concerns that require you to set up more stringent and more focused goals for them to help them out. And then lastly, for this section, I really want you guys to think about physical or psychological developmental challenges. We regularly run into, in big cats, you'll see animals that have had poor backgrounds that end up with metabolic bone disease that can shape or impact their movement and their development later in life. But we also work with rescues around the world and even actually in the United States as well, where animals may have lost a paw. They may have missed teeth because they've been smashed out due to like part of the industry they came from. They've got injuries or wounds that are impacting them physically because of how they've been contained, cared. They may have been hit by a vehicle and ended up in rehab. There's any number of things that could cause them some physical challenges, which we would want to accommodate, obviously. But think about psychological challenges as well. If bears were rescued from a bear pit, if they don't have trust of humans, if they came from a circus environment, if they were from a facility where they just didn't have that much time to work with them and they're not used to high levels of human interaction or being on exhibit, you can end up with psychological issues that manifest as pacing, as self-mutilation, as oral stereotypies. Keep in mind, if you have set up the situation where you would expect an animal to participate or exhibit specific behaviors and they should be able to successfully, but they don't, lack of species typical behaviors being expressed under optimal or good circumstances is also could be a sign of psychological distress. So that's when you would really take that into account. So think about these things where some animals, your animals may have some developmental challenges and how that could be impactful to your program and to reaching your goals. So that's kind of the end of my first section. We're going to break this up into the two sets if you guys have questions or if you have any discussion. That was the bigger portion where I really wanted us to focus on how we look at that, how we use all of that background of the bears to help us reach the goals that we actually have to reach for medical care, husbandry care, and just general overall welfare. So, Ange, were there any questions or is there anything you want me to touch on?
Yeah, well, this is definitely the time, guys, to input your questions into the chat feature. So we can ask Jay, your focus on, how you need to use natural behavior to look at your training session. A quick question for you, Jay. If you had to choose the most important behaviors to focus on, that would have the most benefit for the species going into their lifespan, what would they be?
It sounds odd, but I would focus immediately on recall, having them come to you. Target, because you can shape so many other behaviors. Down, if you can get them down. Up is also very good, but to lie down calmly, because that gives you many other options, even for opportunistic x-rays and that, if they're not trained for tactile or whatever. But long-term, getting an animal to hold. Getting an animal and training them for duration and desensitizing them to the presence of everything. Veterinarians, techs, guests, having different equipment come in, because I promise the first time you come in with a big x-ray box, if you haven't desensitized them, it's going to be a very different experience, especially when people are throwing on colored lead vests. So really getting your animals used to experiencing other stimuli that they might not otherwise and making them comfortable with that. Honestly, it's like when you get a puppy. You take that puppy places, you expose it to things, you reinforce it for good, calm behavior. You really want to expose bears to as many different types of things, properly, positively reinforcing them so that they learn that these things are not necessarily going to be harmful and that they can take those changes into account. So when you ask them to do new things, they've already learned how to learn from you. So those would be the core ones I would really fall back on, always rely on.
Great. Can you give everyone more detail on how you train for anesthesia?
For which one again, sorry?
Your anesthesia.
Oh, so voluntary injections?
Mm-hmm.
That was side presentation, depending on your species or your bear. I've seen this actually done on a big cat with the front foot. That would freak me out a little. There's not as much muscle there. My preference, you can do it with shoulder. You start off target, they're watching you. Same way I talked about eye, but do a broader slow motion and get them to slowly lean in. And then over time, this is what I did in China successfully to get at that front shoulder. There's enough muscle on a bear's front shoulder that once they put that in place, you teach them to hold that over for an extended period of time. Then you start desensitizing them to touch. Over time, you desensitize them to alcohol, to pricks, to using like maybe a blunt needle, then small gauge needles, and work your way up. And you can do the same thing either by shaping the environment so they have like a barrier they walk in between that puts them parallel. You can use a hip target and teach them to swing their hip in and around, or the same thing, use your target and scooch them along your barrier. And then when their hip gets in closer, you reinforce and capture that behavior. Then it's the same thing with that back hip. That's what we actually did with the pandas. With them, they had more muscle in their back hip, but we successfully did this with a sun bear in that front shoulder because they're so muscled that that was a really good place to do it as well. So it's really having your target, because then you can always move back to that, working slowly on shaping a side presentation, either one, then being able to get duration, hold, and then slowly start introducing that tactile, introduce the smell. If you're going to introduce any type of gel, if you're going to introduce any type of alcohol rub in that, you need to do that early on, because I promise you the first few times it's going to derail your training session, because bears, being as olfactory as they are, love new smells, and it's going to take it completely off the chart. So just take and factor that kind of thing into mind, and then really train them to stay there, giving them periodic rewards until you release them. But it's just those baby steps. You can do it in an accelerated time. I have fully injection trained a tiger in 3 days. That was naive at the beginning. And when I was in China training bears at the research base there, I had successfully injection trained 2, and I'd been training multiple while I was teaching multiple people tactics in less than 30 days. So we were very, very successful, and with some dedication and just thinking through your steps, it's a pretty straightforward process. And you're also free to reach out to us for techniques, for ways people have successfully, set themselves up for success, for needle gauges, lengths, that kind of thing. We can also address all of that via the Facebook page and website.
We have another good question here. Someone is asking, they have a grizzly bear who seems to be very adverse to touch, but is target trained and will touch face and nose. What would be your recommendation to kind of help get them beyond that hurdle so that the bear is more comfortable for touch across its body?
So many years ago, there was a book that came out roughly around the same time as our Don't Shoot the Dog Bible, but it was called the Tellington Touch. And what the basic concept was, it was for dogs, but you had your target, you had a target pole, and in our case, we would obviously have the bear's target to a fist, to a ball, whatever, through the barrier. And I use this regularly. This is very much a hoof stalk kind of approach, but it works well with primates and it works well with bears. You have another innocuous, just dowel rod or something nearby where as the bear gets there, you introduce the rod and they can look at it, they can see it's not going to kill them. Then you poke it, you put it through the bars a little bit while they're sitting there. You heavily reinforce non-reactiveness or investigating and then coming back to you like, oh, that's not going to kill me. And then over time, you can maybe gently work that way up where you could gently touch them with the end of that rod. Jackpot, lack of reaction, or if they leave and they come back, you reinforce that. You're going to teach them over time, touch is not critical, or like touch isn't going to hurt you. We're not going to do this. We're not here to scare you. We're not here to kill you. And then over time, your rod that was 3 feet long now scooches down to 2 feet long. Then suddenly it's 1 foot long. And then suddenly the bear is close enough where you can, reach in with like a blunted syringe, a pencil, your finger. And it may take a lot of time. I have one rotten little rescued French bulldog, not this one, that was utterly averse to having her nails done. All my other dogs, I lay them down, they get treats, I use a Dremel on them, and Dutch screamed, hollered, fought, peed on us, everything you could think of. And it took me a year and a half of just building up trust, associating treats, having her watch others. If you have more bears that are successful in allowing touch, If you can allow the bear that's a little more afraid to watch the others receive giant rewards for allowing touch, they will process that information. Bears do learn really well by mimicry. So that's something else to think about, but really just overall flooding them with positive reinforcement rewards for allowing even the tiniest of baby steps. And then all of a sudden one day the light's going to go on and they're going to be like, yeah, okay, this isn't the end of the world. I don't care anymore. It could take a week. It could take a month, it could take a year. And over time, you may end up with an animal that just is averse to it, that the best you can do is get them kind of conditioned to come into an area where, I mean, it's not always best, but you may have to dart them. I've seen it rarely. We had a number of big cats at my previous facility that we housed in one area. It was an old school cat complex, and only one of them, was unable to be ever hand injected or pole injected. She was just so averse to everything new. She would come up, she would train, present everything, but anything that went near her or touched her triggered a fear response and she would immediately run away. And that was after years of people building trust and working with her. But you can do it. It's just going to require a lot of patience, and just don't always expect immediate results. But I've had really good luck with that, using a pole as an extension of your arm, as an extension of you, and just teaching them this isn't going to hurt you. This is one more thing that's going to earn you treats.
Great. I think this would be a good time, Jay, if we want to go ahead and move on to your part 2. Everyone keep putting your questions into the chat, and we'll have a round 2 for Q&A.
Well, and this one's short and fun. I also wanted to, instead of just like, kind of focusing on this is the core, this is what I always do. Here's how I teach. Here's how you set things up. Think about the animals. But as we move ahead, and I know a lot of us deal with this, whether we might be in a sanctuary where donors or people come through, where we're on National Geographic and it's great to showcase our work. Many of us work in facilities that may have different types of accreditation, may not be accredited, it doesn't matter. If you're a bear caregiver, at some point, you are probably going to get to talk about what you do. And again, a bear is not always just a bear. How can you work now into your education, your excitement, your knowledge, and your talks, fun behaviors to really showcase now, instead of just reaching your goals based on like what the animal needs, how their physiology is, what cool behaviors can you pull out from the animals that you could teach them to do on cue to showcase why these bears are so cool for friends, family, visitors, guests, VIPs, donors, really thinking about that. So what I wanted to do, and having talked to a few colleagues, I came up with kind of a fun example of something for each species that could be trained on exhibit or in holding or whatever else, but on cue that really, your bears, but think about what cool behavior would you want to be able to show people and tell them about. Angela and I talked about black bears. And Elsa always used to talk about how black bears will berry pick. They'll sit in the middle of a patch and they'll just use their claws and their lips and they'll sift through plants and berries they've dropped into the grass. And it's a really fine-tuned, interesting process that you would expect to see from a primate or a raccoon, but they use the tools at their disposal and they're really, really good at it. And having a way to set this up in front where you you scatter something in, the cue parts and the training parts, the bear comes up, the recall, they wait calmly, you introduce or scatter in, or however you decide to do it. Maybe it's in a box of hay or straw, maybe it's in some grass that's planted there, however you choose to do it. But once you introduce that, then you release the bear and they get to go over and engage in this behavior. Are you teaching them to sift and to berry pick? No. But you set up the stage where they can actually engage in this ability in a way that really works for you, maintains safety, and sets you up for your best education value. Let's look at brown bears. Fishing. Everybody has seen a picture of a grizzly or a brown bear fishing, standing in the water. This would be something you could do. You don't necessarily have to use a live fish. You can use something like whatever their highest value one that they're liable to fish out, a salmon, a mackerel, out of a pool, and you can do the same thing as with the black bears. Have them come down, have them wait, have them hold, you toss it in, they go splashing in, and they get it. You might be able to turn this into a retrieve type of ability where the bear goes and gets it, brings it back and places it, and then earns a reward. But you can focus on how well that these bears have adapted to be able to pull food items and forage in water and in different substrates and surfaces. I love this photo. Actually, at my new zoo, we are actually looking to incorporate an Andean bear exhibit into our vision of what our next phase is going to be. And I sent this photo to my executive director as a way that I want us to be able to show what these amazing bears are capable of. This just knocks me out, but think about being able to put in like a climbing wall or some way, like we've seen tigers with like climbing food poles. How could you incorporate this amazing climbing ability that we see in Andean bears into something you could present to guests? If we're looking at pandas, I would absolutely want to talk about one of two things or both. They can hold on to something. You hand that animal something, it could be sugarcane, it could be bamboo, it could be something that they just hold on to and then give back to you like a rod or a dowel. But that ability to wrap around and grasp is something we take for granted, having this opposable thumb, but none of the other bear species can do, and most other species can't do. But due to that radial sesamoid bone, pandas can. And that's a cool thing to be able to show people how they hold on. And then if you want to demonstrate jaw strength, particularly of pandas and bears, you could take out a piece of bamboo, say, hey, break this or try and break this, and then hand one to your bear with like a little treat drilled in or something, and they can snap it in half with their jaws immediately. So you can really showcase those animals' ability at a time and place of your choosing. It's not a great picture, but vocalizing is one of the things that were brought up. Not only playing in the water, Asiatics are known for like just enjoying themselves in the water, floating and splashing. But this was one thinking about vocalizing. Do they make a noise? Do they have a call or something responsive? Is there a little growl? Is there like a happy noise or chuffing that they make that you could get on cue or find a way to elicit even through building relationships or positive reinforcement, those keeper animal relationships on exhibit, where you can get them to where people can hear what these animals will actually, the noises that they'll make. Getting a sun bear to extend that crazy tongue. If you can get this done on cue, that's a great one for kids to see, for adults to see, to talk about like insectivores and why this is so useful and how they've developed it, because none of the other bears have this. Getting this on cue would be amazing. Polar bears, one of the favorite things that always come up when we've been thinking about exhibit design and that. If you picture polar bears hunting, what are they looking for? They're looking for seal dens, especially the moms, and when they find one, they're going to hammer on top of that until they can collapse it and try to get at the seals that are inside. This is a really cool behavior if you could get on cue with a springboard, with a toy. This is a barrel here. Down below, this is one of my favorite things. This is one of the spy cams that they use to try and record polar bear behavior, where this animal's engaging in the same thing. But this is a great video I found showing exactly what we would want to be able to do. Can you get this on cue and explain to people why this is so critical and so cool and is unique specifically to polar bears? That's something you could get them to do on cue and reinforce in front of guests so that you could really reinforce that. And then sloth bears, everybody laughs and everybody giggles when the best things that sloth bears do are suck and blow. You can do with that whatever you want. Try to stay tasteful, because obviously somebody from HR will end up listening at some point, but you can do a lot of really fun stuff about this. But you talk about insectivores, how their teeth are modified and different. But this is one we actually did. It was one of our keepers. This is Bodo. He is with is at the Omaha's Henry Dorley Zoo and Aquarium out in our, previously but the Asian Highlands exhibits, and his keeper taught him to interact and really took advantage of that sucking behavior. And I really want you to experience the whole thing, so I'll shut up when I push play. But this hose is about 7 feet long, and while the keeper is holding it in this video, you could extend it out 7 feet. There's a barrier, secondary barrier and fence there for guests to be behind, and you could let the guests hold, like, the mealworms in their hand in this container or whatever else. So this is really impactful. So that's a self-reinforcing behavior done on cue when you present a hose, and when you stretch that sucker out, again, that's about 7 feet long. So that really lets guests get an idea of what these guys are capable of and what they can actually do. You could also turn around and teach them to blow, something right back out that tube. Don't point that at anybody. Nobody wants a face full of that. But again, you can see where this would be a lot of fun, really impactful, showcase the animal's abilities, and make for a great presentation at the same time. So what we're doing here is instead of saying, okay, the animals are built like this, we know they behave like this, I want to use that to shape shifting and down and injection training and blood draws. Now I want to take something these bears are known for, get them to do it on cue. This is going to be enriching. It's a species typical behavior we would want them to elicit. It improves your keeper animal relationships and that social aspect of things because they're building that trust with you. They're getting reinforced with an appropriate food reward for engaging in those behaviors. And it's really reinforcing for the guests because it's fun. And you're telling them a story and you're sending them back with something that they're going to remember for a really long time and tell other people about. Oh, and apparently we're going to see it again. So that's what I had for you guys. I kind of wanted to go at both aspects of that. Did we have any other questions? Anything else you guys would like to chat about this?
Yeah, everyone, please put your questions in the chat feature that asks Jay. Jay, one question is, what do you believe are some of the challenges per species when it comes to working and just doing training with them that's unique to each species?
Okay, if I miss a species, okay, hold on. Let's go back a few slides so I can work my way through this and not try to forget anybody. So if I were going to just in brief, so black bears, you're going to have kind of that torpor thing. Very often we're housing these guys in small groups and getting that communal kind of feeding, training. Sometimes separating them can be really, really challenging. These guys, they're going to have more of a fear response. And if one of them goes after another, if they're afraid of you, if something startles them, their first instinct is going to be to run, to bolt. So you're going to have more of a flight response in these guys, but you really generally are going to need to find a way to manage them communally. Most times, again, we house them in groups of 2 or 3. So being able to successfully separate them and have them tolerate that, not have that cause them distress, social separation. Or if you've got multiple bears in front of you, I have done it, train them to stay calm while the other animal receives something and some training. And then you're also benefiting from mimicry there. But I think that for black bears can be some of our challenges. Brown bears, they watch everything and they're ridiculously strong. And we'll get to polar bears. They're a little more kind of flat-footed terrestrial in that. Brown bears can and will lift, break, pull. They will test every door, every barrier you've put in. They'll see if they can break it. Like, this is the species that if they're going to try and break something just because they can, it'll be this species. They're really good at everything. This is your generalist, so you have to think about every safety consideration. If you were going to put something in place for polar bears, you'd want it in place for brown bears. If you're going to put it in place for a sun bear or a sloth bear, you'd probably also want it in place for a grizzly bear. These guys are probably going to test you, and just their sheer size and strength and ability to mess things up is what you want to really account for. Andean bears, mostly positioning. I think they're generally a pretty decent kind of like even species to work with. Like sun bears, I consider these the more arboreal species. They think quick. Not as sun bears are crazy. We'll get there. They move quickly. They think quickly. That's part of their natural history. They're not slower. They're not as methodical and ponderous as you're going to find polar bears and grizzly or brown bears to be. These guys are always going to be thinking, always going to be moving, always using their faces and all of their limbs. You can see by this climbing to interact with the environment. So you really have to have those safety considerations and abilities in place. Pandas is patience. Honestly, it's patience. Again, you've got some different physical abilities in there, and you have to be able to deal with some really significant hormonal changes and, oh my God, dietary. With these guys, if you're working with pandas, if you've ever done it, you can hand them 4 types of the most gorgeous bamboo in the world, and they don't want anything to do with it. And then they're mad, and then they don't want to participate, and they prefer different things. Their tastes, what is reinforcing to them, changes regularly and drastically. And you really have to be able to account for that with these guys. They're not quite as omnivorous as other species, so you're also going to be a little more limited on what you can actually, you're going to be likely be successful with reinforcements. They can be picky. I don't really know of many challenges. I found this to actually be kind of one of the most easygoing species, But when you're working with them, like that can also work as a detriment because they're just as liable to stay in their sunny spot in the yard as in look at you and be like, no, you got nothing that's worthwhile me getting out of this lovely little, like, depression I've dug myself in this, sunny or shady spot. This is where having a really high value recall and that really reinforcing them coming and getting off their butts and coming up when you ask them to can be really, really, really important. Sun bears are nuts. I love them. They're always thinking. They're always moving. You have got to be a very good trainer to start working at things like blood draws, injections. They're always moving. They're always grabbing. That is just what they do. They're clever. They think in those terms. This is like Andean bears on crack. Really encouraging them to be able to sit and interact with their environment. You may have less expectations initially for duration in that, just because of how they're motivated to move so quickly, but really thinking how you can adapt to that and being really clever in your positioning, because this isn't a bear that's going to like lie down. Sitting them up, keeping them more arboreal where they feel safer is something that's going to benefit you. And of course, polar bears, slow and steady. Slow and steady. If you have ever trained a tortoise, you can train a polar bear. Keeping in mind, while this is more active, my usual picture for polar bears and thinking about their natural history is the polar bear staring at the hole in the ice, waiting hours for a seal to pop up. They will stare at you like that, trying to figure out what you want. You really have to be patient and really be able to work through that time frame, but also, again, always respecting the sheer power involved with these guys, but keeping in mind they're going to be slower moving. They're going to need different positioning requirements because they're not going to be as movable, as flexible, as inclined to climb, sit, and do all those other physical permutations. So you're really going to have to focus on your environment with these guys to set them up for physical comfort and success. For example, the blood draws, you don't have a lot of flexibility in sitting, standing in that. You're going to want to go for something flat. They can put their paw forward or out, maybe get at a back paw. I know some zoos have done that, but ways that the animals are going to be comfortable. And a full-grown polar bear is nothing to laugh at. It's going to take some real accommodations to modify the environment and your antecedents to set yourself up for success. That's what I got. Those are my quick picks for each bear.
All right. Are there any final questions you guys have for Jay? We'll wait a second here with the chat room to see if anything comes through.
Well, and keep in mind, did I miss sloth bears? Oh, I did. There was one more slide. I knew the video was next. Thank you for catching that. I told you. See, that's why I wanted to scroll through them or have them in front. Honestly, this is the species that I have worked with and found the most susceptible and expressive about their seasonal metabolic changes. When they go into their hyperphagia phase, they get frantic. They're very good at using their claws. Sun bears are good and they're quick with those little grabs. Don't ever let those little buggers grab you. But sloth bears are always thinking about like how they can grab things. You don't want them like blasting you in the face, when they're like doing their sucking and blowing and that. But really being cognizant, because once these guys start getting into that hyperphagia phase, recognizing that, and you would not want to start off your day as they're going into that, summer overfeeding phase with like, a little training session with some mealworms. Get something into them, take that edge off so that they're not frantic about like, what they feel that they need to be eating. Get some calories, get some bulk into them, and then look at using some of your preferred feeding methods or your preferred reinforcers for getting them involved in training. I have worked with bears, even like pandas when I was in China, that they had withheld food from in the morning just to make sure that they came up and participated. And those bears were more, I mean, I almost got pulled in one time because they were so frantic for their food. They weren't focusing on anything I might have been telling them. It could have been the most basic targeting command, and that overwhelming desire to eat, and particularly exacerbated in a hyperphagia phase, just overwhelmed every other thing. So you really have to make sure you help them take that edge off of their hunger. And then you can start like, accommodating and setting yourself up for a successful training session.
Yeah, Jane, I think that's a great point. Do you have other tips on how to handle some of that energy and the frustration when these bears are in the hyperphagia? Tips to kind of set them up for success?
Again, we had some great talks about this in Scotland. This is the type, when you get into the hyperphagia phase, you also have to be really diligent about your overall management. This isn't one of those things. If you are, for example, let's use sloth bears. If you are using sloth bears and you know, let's say you've watched yours and June, these bears start ramping up, they start getting really hungry, and then your veterinarian or your nutritionist says, okay, well, we'll increase the diet 5% one week and then 10% the next. Meanwhile, your bear's activity levels and hunger levels have gone up 57%. You need to be able to be responsive. This is being responsive. This is the core of behavior-based husbandry. If your bears are slowing down and because you're approaching like winter or breeding, phase out the foods, heavily focus on the target behaviors that are of an absolute priority, and use your highest value food reinforcers to get involvement during those times. And then leave them alone when they're in that torpor phase. For hyperphagia, get them some bulk, get them some food that they like in the morning. Maybe it's the chow, maybe it's some vegetables, maybe it's some greens, get them, or browse, get them to where they're feeling a little more full, burn off some activity, maybe through enrichment exercises, do some really high energy. If you've got them where they can do climb or they do ups or downs or whatever else, have them shift and move, try to burn off a little bit of that energy for some big rewards. And then again, zero in on those finer tuned, really goal-oriented behaviors that you want with then some really precise high value reinforcement. You are going to have to make sure you stay safe because again, I've been doing this 30 years with bears, and a frantic, hungry bear is actually more challenging to train than a fearful bear, an angry bear, an aggressive bear, because they're just, everything is overridden by hunger. And you have to be overall accommodating and thinking about that. It can't be incremental little food increases. It has to be, is this bear satiated? Is this bear leaving food behind every day? Because if not, that bear is still going to always be hungry and it's always going to be distracted. Its attention is going to be elsewhere, which also means they're going to be reactive to you. If you touch a bear in that state that's only thinking about food and they whip around to get out whatever is touching it, you don't want to be you, your tool, a $50,000 ultrasound probe. Really think about like what hunger and like those hormonal like phases that have accelerated our metabolism and our activity levels are doing to their focus and their ability to participate. It's not their fault. They're not choosing not to participate. They're not choosing to be difficult. They are being overridden by these absolute natural predisposed genetic dispositions that they have, and they're trying to meet them. It's our job to help fulfill those. When you're filling those, you can still successfully train during hyperphagia and other phases where activity levels might be increased safety and vigilance, increased overall food, really be able to think back to when I said targets and some of those behaviors that allow you to back up several steps and get compliance back, get their brain back on track, and just thinking about all those ways to set them up for success at a time when it's going to be a bit of a struggle for them to focus. Is that what you were getting at, Ange?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, with that, I think it's time to end our session here. Jay, thank you so much for your presentation, and we thank everyone for joining us today. Wanted to let you know that our next webinar is August 11th with Dr. Jake Beasy. And he's going to be talking about understanding animal welfare from an animal's perspective. So if you haven't registered already, please do so on our website. We are really enjoying kind of doing this avenue of webinars and where this is going to take us. If you'd like to kind of help support us in this and help us make sure we can do this free in the future as we keep going on, go to our website. There's a lot of ways you guys can support us. We have Cafe Press merchandise. We have PayPal set up. We have Amazon Smile, so you can choose Bear Care Group every time you're shopping on Amazon. So hopefully you'll reach out and help support us. And we are excited to have you guys join us again in the future. So thank you guys all for participating. We're going to continue this on Facebook with Jay and myself throughout the week. So if you have questions, get them on Facebook and we'll continue this chat. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for participating, guys. We appreciate you.